I questioned the environmental component of this report as faulty, and I wrote some blogs and some posts on Twitter, and I got a response from the director of EAT in an email. And in this email, he said to me that Eat Lancet, while touted as the planetary diet to protect human health and planet health, with planet health they mean the environment, the report was really written with human health in mind, and that Eat Lancet is not the diet to halt climate change. It's not the diet to reduce environmental harm. In fact, I could read his email to you if you are interested in it.
1, 2, 3.
My name is Carl Powell.
I am Marco Casali.
I'm Lasse Rantala.
Carl Dial. I'm the...
Escapist.
Hola, soy Marco Casali y ustedes están escuchando
To the Escapist Corner. Moro! Rantala Lasse tässä terve. Sä kuuntelet Escapist Corneria.
Yeah, so welcome to the Escapist Corner. Yeah, welcome, Frank Mitloehner. I think I'm the only one who might be pronouncing your last name right in the podcast world.
Yes, you are. Yes, you are.
So I'm
because you also have an umlaut in your name. That's why.
Yeah. That's it. I'm very honored to have you on, and this is sort of a dream come true for me to be able to talk to these really bright minds out there, so I'm humbled. And before we get into the weeds of everything, I thought we might just start with just the background, because you are from Germany, but you live in the States. So where do we start? Where do you come from in Germany?
I grew up near the Dutch border in a place called Viersen. That's near Düsseldorf, and that's really close, maybe 10, 15 miles from the Dutch border in Western Germany. Right after the wall came down, I was the first West German student to study in East Germany, in Leipzig, and did my master's there in agriculture engineering. And then I went to Texas, where I did my PhD. And then from there, I went to California 20 years ago.
Yeah. I mean, that's now Leipzig is like this really cool town to go as a student, I think. I think that was a bit different when you were young.
Yes.
But
yes.
you were before your time, as we say.
I was, when I studied there, that was really literally right when the wall came down, and many of my professors were still communist, and they looked at me as if I were a Martian who just landed, on their campus. But I had a great time there. I had a really good time and great education, and made many friends.
Yeah. And why did you go for animal science, or agriculture and engineering and animal science? What was the drive for that?
Well, I think it was kind of a coincidence, because I really wanted to become a psychiatrist, but I was not accepted into medical school. As it showed, or as it turned out later, I was rejected to medical school because of a mistake that was made. So they first rejected my application, and then later, after I signed up for tropical, subtropical agriculture and agriculture engineering as a major, I received a letter from the medical school saying that they apologize for making an administrative mistake, and they are lucky to, or they are pleased to offer me admissions to medical school. I took the letter and I ripped it into pieces, and I stayed my course. Yeah. So, and the reason why I studied animal agriculture was because at the time I spent some time in Southern Africa, and I visited some ostrich ranches and game ranches and cattle ranches, and I loved it. I fell in love with it. Yeah. I just literally fell in love with it.
Yeah, I mean, I can understand that. I grew up. I didn't grow up on myself, but my my relatives had a farm with cows and pigs and chickens and so on. And so I grew up from a small boy. I was feeding cows and bringing them to the fields and so on. I don't know, 5 years old, I was just putting out 30 cows into the greens. And I don't know, I always had that. I always would bring that with me wherever I'm at, and I kind of had the experience of growing up something, and every part of it, like you get the calves, and also when you have to send them for slaughter and stuff like that. So I've been in most of the process of that. When you have done that, this is kind of the fallacy of knowledge, right? You think that everyone knows how it is, but that's not the case. I mean, I haven't been to the big farms or big cattle ranges and stuff like that. But anyway, you went into. Did you go straight to Texas after that for the PhD, or how did it work?
Yeah, after my time in Leipzig, I went to Göttingen University for a little while, and then from there to Texas Tech University, where I did my PhD. That's in Lubbock, Texas. And then after I did my PhD, a little postdoc, and then I went from there to Davis, California. I can tell you, going from Germany to Lubbock, Texas to Davis, California is quite a journey.
Yeah, I can imagine. So I'm thinking going from the west to the east.
Yes.
So you're almost in this conservative, communist atmosphere almost. It's Freundschaft and everything in the classroom, and then you go to the deepest states of cowboys, in one sense, Texas. How was that?
Texas was actually a great experience. People are very friendly there. If you're interested in livestock, if you're interested in cattle and beef cattle, then that's where you go. I mean, if you are interested in studying beef cattle, that's where they are. And so I was particularly interested in the environmental impact of livestock, and in this case, beef and dairy. And so I did my PhD on beef environmental management, working in large feedlots, which are the ones that are most often critiqued. And then after I did that, I came to California because that's where the dairy cows are. So I have seen and worked pretty much in all those areas in the States and also internationally, where cattle production, but also other livestock species are raised. I have a pretty good sense for how it's done and where it's done, how and so forth. So I have a good overview of livestock.
Yeah, and this is kind of how I stumbled across you. Was you're a very productive, my friend, on putting out good information as a researcher, and also because you're very active on Twitter, and I've seen a lot of people within the dietary scene have used your data to show, especially when it comes to what dietary choices are sustainable and stuff like that. So that's kind of where I stumbled across you first time, I think, on Twitter, and then I've seen you also on a couple of podcasts with some people on YouTube, and then kind of gone down that rabbit hole of lectures and speeches and stuff like that. So very much good information out there already. And so what I was thinking is that I first wanted to ask you is what makes you want to do that? Like, what makes you want to put out that information in Twitter and so on? Because that could be really a time-consuming black hole.
You are right. It could be. Now, I'm a professor, but I'm also an air quality extension specialist. And in my role of of being an extension specialist, my job is to get information from the university out into the real world.
Yeah.
Many professors want to publish their work, want to do research and publish their work, and feel that they have to study, that they have to teach students because it's expected of them. I feel different about that. I, of course, do research and publish it. That's of course a main role. But I also love teaching. I love teaching, and I love teaching students on campus, and I love teaching people off campus who are interested in the subject matter area that I represent. And so to me, it's the most noble thing I can do to do research and then share that with an interested public. Because obviously there's a lot of interest in how livestock is raised, what the environmental footprint of livestock is, what the environmental footprint of our food choices are. And not just the environmental footprint, but also what the animal welfare considerations are, food safety considerations, the whole issue around workers in livestock agriculture, the question of financial viability of animal agriculture. All of these things are sustainability areas that I hold dear and do research on. And in my opinion, that research is only really valuable if it gets out. And how do you best get it out?
Yeah.
So if I were just to publish in the peer-reviewed literature, I would have 20, 30 people cite a paper I publish a year. Yeah. While I'm on Twitter, I have about 3 million impressions a month. Okay, so you don't get that reach. You don't get that reach if you're not on social media.
Yeah. No, I mean it's good it's good to use that for the right reasons. I would say, especially, but it's so much noise on it, of course. But I think one small result of that is, of course, we get to spread good information to people that are not experts in agriculture and air quality and so on. So I wanted to kind of back a bit to also some stuff that I think we kind of experienced this on opposite sides of the world, but at the same time. And there has been like a very strong movement, I would say, especially in the I don't know, tech world, but also in the Netflix and stuff like that, to produce a certain amount of movies and content that is based on wrong facts. So, and why to be more specific, we have some movies called Cowspiracy, What the Health, Game Changers, and stuff like that on Netflix. Now, there are many bad movies, bad documentaries online, and I don't get that. It doesn't matter to me if people do bad stuff out there. However, what makes me maybe itch a bit and take on this is because I talk to normal people every day, and they come and they say these things that they got from these movies.
Yes,
and they're convinced. So, and when it comes to food and dietary, so on, people are it's a very sensitive topic, and people are very easily convinced to something, and it's very hard to get out of that. So, and I'm doing these kind of tests on myself, of course, too. Like, am I a very biased person in this case? And that might be, but if we look at specifically these movies, then Cowspiracy, for example, they have been citing numbers, and I think this is important, that they have taken numbers that that you have shown to be false, right?
Yes.
And specifically, you have to correct me if I'm wrong. There's something called FAO in the States, that does these lifetime analysis of greenhouse gases and the environmental footprint of certain production, like beef production, transportation, and so on. And these movies, they quote these studies then, but you are at least the only one I know that has been able to just pinpoint down to these researchers to say, hey, this is not correct data.
Yeah, let me provide some nuance on this. So the FAO is the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization, and they sit in Rome, Italy. The FAO is an organization that I have critiqued in the past, but I've also worked with them. I was a chairman of a committee that established a global gold standard for life cycle assessments for livestock, meaning I was chairman of a partnership that had 300 scientists develop the methodology on how to quantify the environmental footprint of livestock and poultry. So I do have a good feel for what these reports say that were produced within the FAO. The FAO originally put out a report called Livestock's Long Shadow, in which they compared livestock to transportation. I showed them why I disagreed, and the reason why I disagreed was because they used different methodologies to assess the impact of livestock on climate versus the impact of transportation on climate. And they after that criticism, retracted that part of their report. Later, they reviewed their numbers and arrived at different numbers and so on. That's the kind of nuance that's getting lost. This film Cowspiracy did not use FAO numbers. They used horrifically wrong numbers from a group that calls itself the World Watch Institute. Sounds like a important name, an important entity, but it consists of 3 former world bankers who, for whatever reason, feel that they are qualified to make major assessments. What they said, what the so-called World Watch Institute said, and the number that was quoted by Cowspiracy was that livestock emits 51% of all greenhouse gases globally. That's a laughable number. And it is a dangerous number. And here's why it's a dangerous number. So first of all, it's laughable because it's wrong, okay? Globally, livestock emits 14.5%. That's a global average. In Germany, in the United States, in other developed countries, livestock emits approximately 4% of the total. The fossil fuel sector, meaning cars, trucks, trains, planes, ships, factories, and so on, and power production, emit 80% of all greenhouse gases. For those who don't believe that, they should just go and view the recent assessments during COVID-19, where you see how greenhouse gases have gone down because of the global lockdown, and how smog-forming gases have gone down because of the lockdown. I assure you, the cows didn't stop belching.
Yeah.
But the cars, trucks, trains, planes, ships, and so on, they stopped for 2 months. And as a result, you see a drastic reduction of emissions. So Cowspiracy was totally wrong, was criticized by people like me. I wrote a blog about it, and you can find it on my GHG Guru blog site. That's, by the way, my social media handle, GHG Guru, stands for Greenhouse Gas Guru. And I criticized them, and they accepted my criticism. And since that criticism, since my blog no longer used that 51%, they still use a wrong number, the original FAO number of 18%, but at least no longer the ridiculous number of 51.
Yeah. I mean, that puts it a bit into perspective. So I think this is also, again, the 18% and so on is more more of the number that most people here are using. Do you see a big difference between like the States and Germany, for example, when it comes to greenhouse gases from?
I would say, first of all, the 18% number is no longer used by its authors.
Yeah.
Okay. The authors, the FAO, has revised that to 14.5%. It's not a huge difference, but it is a difference. In the United States, in Germany, in the UK, in other developed countries of the world, all of agriculture amounts to approximately 8 to 10%. In the United States, it's 9%. In Germany, it's about the same. Half of that, approximately half of that, is plant agriculture. The other half is animal agriculture. So if you want to know life cycle emission numbers for beef, I first give you the global numbers of all greenhouse gases in the world. Global beef makes up 6% of all greenhouse gases. Global dairy makes up 3% of all greenhouse gases. In a country like the United States, where we have a lot of beef and a lot of dairy, beef emits 3% of the total and dairy emits 2% of the total. So it's not nothing, but it's certainly not the horrific numbers that the vegan community like to circulate, because they always do the following. They actually use a little trick. They cite global numbers because those global numbers are higher, and they say, you know, livestock emits more greenhouse gases than transportation, 14.5%. What they don't say is that this is a global number.
Yeah.
Now, if you were interested in buying a car, and you were interested in the environmental footprint of that car, would you ask your car dealer what the average global emissions of a car are? Or would you seek for specific car information of the make and model that's available to you in Germany?
Yeah.
Of course you would look for the type of car that you can buy in Germany and not have that be conflated with cars driven in Ethiopia and Paraguay, Brazil and Australia. That makes no sense. But that's what they do with livestock. They use global averages because they make livestock look bad. And the reason why they make livestock look bad is because in many developing countries, livestock is very inefficient, meaning per animal, livestock produces very little product there. So for example, the average cow in India produces between 10 to 20 times less milk than the average cow in the United States or Germany.
Yeah.
And because of that, they have to have herds of livestock that are enormous in size. Okay, that's why the global environmental footprint of livestock looks large, because of inefficiencies in livestock production in the developing world.
Yeah, and if we compare that then to if we say these countries, underdeveloped countries, would take out their beef and cattle, goats and everything, and replace that with, I don't know, what could they replace that with on the same area?
They're not replacing that. They're going the opposite route. Opposite route. In the developing world, the demand for animal source foods is increasing. And the reason why it's increasing is that many people who lived in poverty in the past will, as a first line of action, when they have more disposable income, change their diet to a more plant-based diet. That's the first thing people do. When you have poor countries and people all of a sudden make more money because, they have better jobs or so, the first thing they do is they buy some eggs, they buy some milk, they buy some meat, because they know that this is more nutrient-dense food and this is desirable for their kids. That's the first thing they do. So they are not going off and buy the Impossible Burger, okay? That's not happening.
Yeah,
that's not happening.
But if we look at specifically, would would it be possible in, I don't know, Ethiopia? What would they like? What kind of crops would they need to have to replace those cattle? That's kind of
So it's a great question. In the whole Northern Africa and Middle East area, you have the situation of water deficiency. So traditionally, agricultural systems in these areas are livestock heavy. Okay, they have a lot of goats, they have a lot of sheep, some cattle, but mainly small ruminants, because for the most part the land they have is marginal land. It's not really suitable for crop production. In those areas where they do grow crops, and you will see that if you look around the internet these days, they are very susceptible to major plagues. For example, right now, the whole area of Northern Africa and Middle East is destroyed by what do you call them? Not roaches. Sorry?
Parasites?
No. By it's not grasshoppers, but they look like grasshoppers. What are they called? It escapes me right now, but they look like grasshoppers. Do you know what I'm talking about? Locusts. They're called locusts. Okay. So locusts.
Yeah.
Auf Deutsch Heuschrecken.
Yeah.
Heuschrecken. In English, they're called locusts. Okay, and these locusts have destroyed everything in these areas this year. So there will be major famine in those areas because the crops that people eat are gone. So without the livestock sector, they'd be in deep trouble there right now.
Yeah, I mean that has been happening since the Bible was written.
That's correct.
But
that's correct.
So my point is, like if we look at a country like Egypt, they more or less need to drain the entire Nile, right, to be able to do these kind of crops in those areas, right? So that means we're going to lose a lot of animal life from the river, I guess. So looking from again from maybe an environmental point of view, and I think you are definitely much more of an expert in this than me, but to be able to grow something, you will need to have, it's not just enough to have some seeds and some soil. Like we need to just look at what is actually inside the soil. So what do we need to have to grow something, to grow crops, and where does that come from? I mean, one of the biggest inventions was made by a German. It was during was it before or after the Second World War?
Haberbosch.
Using fertilizers, right? And
it's called Haberbosch.
Yeah.
Haberbosch.
And so basically, what is fertilizer?
So yeah, just like we, humans and animals need nutrients to grow, need nutrients to live, so do plants. And so they need stuff like nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, numerous macro and micronutrients. One of the most important nutrients they need is nitrogen. And Haber-Bosch, you just cited Haber-Bosch, invented a process by which nitrogen, which is over 70% of our atmosphere is nitrogen gas, by which nitrogen is pulled out of the atmosphere and made into nitrogen fertilizer. This process is the reason that about half of humankind is on our planet. Yeah. Without that process, we wouldn't be able to sustain life as we know it. So some people will say this is wonderful, other people will say this is terrible, we shouldn't have as many people on our earth. And they always say that thinking of the other people and not themselves and their own families, of course, because they like their life. They appreciate their own life. But so plants need nutrients. Plants also need proper soil, healthy soil. They need microbial rich soil. And they need water. Of all agricultural land in the world today, 2/3 do not satisfy those requirements I just listed. They're either nutrient poor or they're water poor. And because of that, 2/3 of all agricultural land are referred to as marginal land. You cannot grow crops there, but what is done to that land is livestock is kept there. In fact, ruminant livestock. And the reason for that is that ruminant livestock, such as cattle, sheep, and goats, can eat the only vegetation that grows there, which is cellulose-rich grasses. And the reason why they can ingest and digest that is because of the rumen they have, Wiederkäuervormark, the rumen they have that enables them to digest cellulose. We humans or pigs or poultry cannot digest cellulose. They can. And now comes the other part of this equation. 30% of all agricultural land in the world is arable land. So 70% is marginal, cannot be used to grow crops. And 30% is arable, meaning there are enough nutrients, the soil is okay, and there's enough water to grow crops. And that's where we grow all the other food for human and animal consumption. So when some people say we should stop producing livestock because they're using all that land that we should better use for growing crops directly, they leave out that 70% of that land could not be used to grow crops directly, but only ruminant livestock.
I mean, theoretically, we could use that land, right? If we would change that soil, right?
You cannot change the soil. You cannot change the soil. I mean, if you look at the areas we just talked about, Northern Africa or the Middle East or large parts of Australia, there are two things you run into. The one is insufficient soil quality, and secondly, insufficient water. So you can, of course, you can grow crops in the desert in Saudi Arabia or in Israel, but how do you do it? You have to import vast amount of nutrients, and you have to desalinate water to get the salt out of ocean water and use that water to irrigate. And that is cost prohibitive for the vast majority of developing countries in the world.
Yeah, I mean, you require energy for that, right? So you will need to spend energy to make that energy in a very insufficient way.
And what is energy? Energy is, a process by which a lot of carbon is released in the atmosphere. And that's exactly what we don't want to do.
Yeah, so that is, if we look at greenhouse gases, is the major one that we know, that most people know about, and then of course methane when it comes to comes up also regarding livestock. But if we look at, if I just go back there a bit, we have this situation where we have, okay, we want to grow crops in these areas because of, I don't know, insane incentives. I'm just saying, how are we supposed to make that sustainable following? And I'm going to go into this now, which is, I just glanced on this Eat Lancet report that came out. I don't know if you had the time to do it. But basically, when I look at their illustrations, I only see fruits and crops, and then they have some. When you look a bit further down, it says like 8 grams of beef or something like that consumption, and I'm wondering how we're supposed to be able to get that entire plate full with crops in a sustainable way.
Well, I know because even before this report came out, I was already quite active in discussing it on social media. Again, if you Google, if you check my Twitter handle and Eat Lancet, you will find the way I argued along those lines.
Yeah.
They are proposing a diet that's largely a vegan diet. They would argue that's not true because we still allow some animal source foods, but the amount that they allow is laughable. It is absolutely laughable. If you take a €2 coin, and then you take 2 of these €2 coins and put them next to each other, that's the amount of beef you're allowed to eat.
Yeah.
They allow you to eat 1.5 eggs, but not per day, per week.
Yeah.
Per week. No, I'm sorry, my friend, but I inhale 1.5 eggs, okay? If somebody were to tell me that's all I can eat in a week, then that's laughable. So it is a largely vegan diet, and they are proposing that we replace animal source foods, particularly animal source proteins, with nuts. Okay. So there are 5 places in the world where you can grow nuts. I don't know if the authors, I don't know if these people are aware of that, but you can grow nuts in Iran, Turkey, China, Australia, and California. That's where you can grow nuts. Yeah. So the Chinese are not exporting their nuts. The Australian nuts are largely macadamias. Iran is a country that many folks have trade issues with and so on. It's not really a major export nation for nuts. Turkey has other issues, as you know, political issues. They could produce it, the climate would be okay, but not in the quantities needed. That pretty much leaves California, and we already have everything here in nuts, okay? We have more nuts than anybody could ever wish for, because nuts are great, they taste well, and they're good nutritionally and so on, but they are very thirsty plants. To grow one single almond nuts, you need about 4 liters of water. 4 liters to grow one single nut. And that's nuts. If you understand my pun here, because we are very water deficient in California, okay? For us to have so much acreage in nuts is not a very smart decision, but it is the reality. But what I can tell you is, it is absolutely impossible. It is absolutely impossible to replace the animal source foods we have today with nuts and legumes. We simply don't have the land anywhere in the world to do that with. So I have many reasons as to why I seriously disagree with Eat Lancet. I have been on the record along those lines, and you'll find a lot of my content on social media. Yeah,
I mean, I'm not super deep into this yet, but it has struck me that I've seen these being quoted all over the place, right, in media. And I've been like trying to figure out where does these guys come from? So I've done like just superficial, research on what these guys are up to. And what I understand, they want to change kind of the world and sustainability of the food system. The thing I don't understand is why they want to do it. Like what's driving them? In one sense, I read a lot about what they're doing and how they're doing it, but I don't know. I don't understand the why in that sense. I understand, sustainability and stuff like that, but there are a lot of scientists in their team. So I'm seriously wondering how can you make this? I mean, where do you get the land from doing this? And then secondly, what do you need to do to produce this, like from a land area? And then how do you grow crops? Like what are the ingredients for growing crops? It's not you need to fertilize and you need to put water into it and stuff like that. So
so let me tell you this. So first of all, I know who the authors are and what their track record is. I would say that most of the authors has a pretty well documented and profound vegan history. Okay, and I have no problem with vegans. They can eat whatever they want. I have no problem with that. I have a problem with them having a problem what I eat.
Yeah.
Because they don't want me to make my choices as to what I can eat or what you can eat. They want to tell you what to eat. And you know what? I have a beef with that because it is my choice. It is my choice who I vote for. It is my choice who I pray for. It is my choice who my partner is. And it is my choice what I eat. And I will not let anybody meddle with any of these freedoms. It is totally undemocratic for people to try to make not just recommendations, but take people's right of choice away in any of those areas. It is not appropriate. It is not appropriate for anybody to tell you or me what we shall eat. And they are actually in their report, in their clear that they want to force us to go plant-based. It's there. So the same people who wrote this report have a long track record of being totally anti-meat, and they would have gone completely plant-based with this report if there hadn't been one author who has an animal background and who insisted that they don't make this into a vegan report. But that was their intent. That was their intent. I questioned the environmental component of this report as faulty, and I wrote some blogs and some posts on Twitter, and I got a response from the director of EAT in an email. And in this email, he said to me that Eat Lancet, while touted as the planetary diet to protect human health and planet health, with planet health they mean the environment, the report was really written with human health in mind, and that Eat Lancet is not the diet to halt climate change. It's not the diet to reduce environmental harm. In fact, I could read his email to you if you are interested in it. He stated things in his email to me that were totally contradicting what Eat Lancet touted to the world. But all that being said, my impression is that they didn't get to where they wanted to go. The whole thing was touted as a big report and international, and this is the new planetary diet. They didn't get that traction, the traction they sought to get. And so I think it's kind of history.
What I see here is, I mean, they just released this, their latest report, right? And they say, let's see here, this is a quote, and they quote one of their professors in the second page, and they say, transformation to health diets by 2050 will require sustainable dietary shifts. Global consumption of fruits, vegetables, nuts, and legumes will have to double, and consumptions of food such as red meat and sugar will have to be reduced by more than 50%. A diet rich in plant-based foods with fewer animal source product confers both improved health and environmental benefits. So I'm not sure like, again, I'm not the specialist when it comes to or let's say it this way, I'm not a professor in sustainability when it comes to agriculture, but I'm not a professor when it comes to nutrition. However, what I can conclude looking at most of these claims when it comes to at least we say the health claims of this diet are usually based on also very weak evidence. So so I would just not leave for this podcast. I would just leave that uncommented, because I'm not. I think I would have to have a someone who is a really expert on that. But I think you can fill in the blank on the environmental question when it comes here. And as you said, they self-reported to you and said it has nothing to do with, or it is not the environment that is important in this case. So I don't understand why they are then claiming this still.
Well, let me just read something to you, okay? So that you don't just take it from me, but I will actually give you a quote.
Yeah.
I just need to find that really quickly. So in his email to me about the environmental piece of Eat Lancet, Frederick de Klerk, who is the director for EAT, wrote to me, and I quote, "The meat consumption limits proposed by the EAT commissions were not set due to environmental considerations, but were solely in light of health recommendations. The dietary guidelines only refer to healthy eating. Thus, it is not the diet to reduce climate change, but the diet to reduce the risk of premature mortality due to dietary-related health causes." That came straight from Eat Lancet. And so I think it's pretty clear what that means, and how that's different from what they are tooting in the rest of the world.
I mean, you said something in another podcast that I think was very also that I've seen now other people doing research on their research. But you said when you looked at their research, it's been very sloppy work. If I'm paraphrasing you, like sloppy work in a sense that it makes you almost passive aggressive, I guess. And I just read a report now from a couple, I think it was 3 other scientists. I can't recall their names right now, but they had done they tried to replicate these claims on health now that you said that. So they tried to replicate how would their diet have a positive impact on human health for people getting overweight or so on, and they could not replicate this because it's not transparent, their numbers. And
I saw that too.
So it all seems, I mean, again, I'm trying to be not as you say in German, parteiisch. I'm not trying to be
biased.
Biased, and I just want to know. Okay, let's go with your claims and say, so let's play this game. How can we make this sustainable?
So let me tell you let me tell you what my perspective is. Whether we like it or not, we all have our filters. Okay, we all have our filters. We all have our biases. It's not fair. If I were to say I have no bias, I would be a liar. Okay, we all have our biases. But let's just put everything we know on the table and and outline the biases. So, for example, if 80% of the authors of that report were vegans, then that would be a bias. In my opinion, a bias noteworthy to the audience of readers, right?
Yeah.
We should know that. We should know that, and it should be very clear. I mean, I am very clear that I am not a vegan. Okay, I'm very clear about that. If and where I have a conflict of interest, I will say where that conflict of interest lies. Okay, so for example, if a study is funded by whatever sponsor, then that will be declared. That's the way you do it. That's the way you do it. Okay. However, that's not always happening in their case, and so I find the report very biased. I think it has been rebutted by many in the health arena, and it's solely based on observational studies in the health arena, and these observational studies are quite weak. They are not cause and effect studies. They are studies where the researchers ask you, what did you eat last year? Yeah. What did you eat last year?
Yeah,
and
I played this game. We had Sean Baker on the show. I know you've been on his show there, but we went this through like I said. It's a bad thing to ask Sean Baker that, but I could just take the next person coming on the street and I ask this person, can you tell me what you ate last week? And then now the more professionality from my point of view is that, we work with people every day with their diet.
Yes.
And we know that people are even cheating on their reporting on a daily basis.
Yeah, right.
So how are you supposed to get viable data from somebody's memory?
Yeah, you don't.
No. So, and I mean, there are studies about that too, of how people are positively reporting, over-reporting things that they think are good. Yeah.
But that's just the one part of this. First of all, there's underreporting and misreporting on what people eat. But secondly, the next question then is, what's your health status? So they ask people to provide memory protocols of what they ate last year. And then they ask them, do you suffer from diabetes or from cancer? Or what kind of cancer? Are you obese? Blah, 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 blah. Okay. So, and then they do the association. They correlate the one with the other. Okay. Yeah. They look at how many times a week did they eat bananas and red meat and who knows what. And then they try to come up with correlations of what people ate versus the health impacts. And that is just an approach riddled with inaccuracies and with problems.
Yeah, I can, like, again, this is, it's more up to the creativity of the people that are trying to find correlations. So it doesn't make too much of sense. And again, I call this, like, we have this small gym here, and I see it more like a laboratory. So we can actually see, demo if something works or not, right? We can see that in actual numbers. Like we can, and again, like we're coming to the CrossFit perspective that we have, but there's this that, we measure output from people.
Yes.
And we do that by calculating simply the power output, like how much weight they can carry up a certain distance over a certain time. And then we can then we can just figure out how much people are increasing. And so we can do these kind of tests, live. And when it comes to now, again, I'm also totally open to whatever people want to eat. They can eat what they want. I see it as I see it as our responsibility, though, to try to do the best to make the people to do the best decisions. And when it comes to if somebody wants to not eat something because of their religious beliefs,
Sure.
Or political beliefs, sure.
Yeah.
But I'm trying to be as neutral as I can, and again, I'm also biased in many ways and so on. But this is why I want to talk to people that know more than me, like you, because I'm not an expert in your, and I don't spend the countless of thousands of hours that you spent on this subject. So I think the things that you've been saying now should be something that people should be listening to. And again, you don't have to believe everything, but just take in consideration the amount of time that you have spent or somebody has spent on this, and coming up with real actual numbers that you have done, and you have again presented these numbers to organizations that they have changed their numbers because of that, which I think is also a good estimate of how good of research you've been doing. So I would just try to point to people that are listening to this to try to maybe go and listen a bit more of the things that you've been sharing, because we're not going to be able to take everything in this podcast. But yeah, now
I don't try to convince anyone of my points or so. That's not my role. Okay, my role is to do research, to do science around livestock and its environmental impacts, and that's what I'm an expert in. So I actually work with real animals, and I have the facility, the equipment, the people who are experts in measuring this stuff to inform the public policy discourse and public interest with information that's real. And so people can take it or leave it. That's their decision. My role is not to convince people what's right or wrong. My role is simply to inform those who are interested in my subject matter area.
Just a question regarding the 8. Did you get invited to discussion with them, or how?
Yes.
Did it,
Yes, I had a discussion with the director of Eat Lancet. His name is Fabrice Leclerc, and that discussion took place at Cornell University, May of 2019. Yes.
Okay. Yeah. And did you get into any conclusions from that, or how did that play?
It was a very courteous interaction, a professional interaction, which I appreciated. Yeah. He presented his viewpoints, which are reflected in the report, and I presented mine, and so the audience was able to hear point and counterpoint, and so that was really good. I like that.
Yeah. Because I mean, they have been. I would say they've been pretty successful in spreading their word. Again, because I see them. I've seen them. If you look at some metrics of how much organic spread they have, and how much, I don't know if it's funding behind it that makes them possible to do a lot of this. But I mean, I've seen them. I've seen them a bit over everywhere, especially in the main media. So
here's the deal with those guys. So in general, the reason why the likes of Eat Lancet and many of the kind of activists out there, the reason why one has the impression that there's a major movement going on is because they are always in front of a microphone. They have a megaphone, a microphone at any given time. They're actually a very small minority, but they are very vocal, very well connected. So you know all the discussion there's about plant-based alternatives to meat, right?
Yeah.
I just read an article this morning that 0.2% of the meat market is the plant-based meat market. 0.2%. Think about all the reporting there is on plant-based meats, like meat alternatives such as Impossible Burger and Beyond Meat. I mean, if you were to believe what you hear in the media about those things, then they should have a market of 20, 30, 40, 50% by now. But they don't. They have a tiny little market of, definitely less than 1%. So you have to really put your filters on when listening and hearing what they have to say. And I will tweet something about this today because I found some really interesting numbers from somebody in this field today.
Yeah, that sounds. I'm gonna check that as soon as it comes out. Just before I let you go, I just wanted to ask you, what would you say is the biggest difference between like German agriculture and American agriculture?
I would say American agriculture is much larger scale. A dairy in Germany with 100 cows is considered a large dairy.
Yeah.
A dairy with 100 cows in California is non-existent. There are no dairies with, certainly not with fewer than 500 cows. The average dairy here has about 1,400, 1,500 milking cows. There are many dairies with 3,000 cows. There are feedlots with anywhere up to 100,000 beef cattle. So the scale is very different. The scale of agriculture is very different. It's much larger here. But with respect to the discussion around farming and sustainability of farming and so on, Germany is 10 years ahead of the United States.
Yeah.
So when it comes to animal welfare and environmental impacts of agriculture, of food, when it comes to discussions around food quality and so on, the Europeans, and particularly the Northern Europeans, including Sweden and Denmark and Norway and Germany and the Netherlands and so on, they are 10, 20 years ahead of the United States. So if I want to know what will happen here in 10 years, all I need to do is check in with my brother and I will know.
Okay, yeah. Are you still in a tight connection with European
Yes,
research?
I am. Yeah, I spent a lot of time in Europe. And that's, of course, pre-COVID-19. Right now, I'm housebound like all of us.
Yeah. So last question before we end up. What's your favorite book that you would recommend in any topic or fiction, whatever?
The Professor and the Madman.
Professor and the Madman. I haven't read that, so that's a good tip.
It's an interesting one of a guy who wanted to assemble an encyclopedia, and he tried to do it himself, but he couldn't. And then somebody who he just didn't know who it was, assisted him in a very, very meaningful way. This guy who assisted him was prolific in how much information he contributed. And it came out that was somebody who was institutionalized, meaning, mentally impaired.
Yeah.
But that guy did a major deal for the British Encyclopedia.
Yeah,
it's a great book.
Okay, no, I'll put that on my reading list. Frank, thank you very much for joining today and taking time for this. I hope you and everyone comes out of this COVID and Corona thing healthy and sound. And yeah, we need more good research out there. So I will put, of course, your links to your blog and to your Twitter below. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. And for those of your listeners and viewers who are interested, I'm also the director of a center here at UC Davis called the CLEAR Center. And so if you go to clear.ucdavis.edu, you'll find a webpage with a lot of good information.
Awesome. Okay. Oh, good. Okay. Then thank you, Frank.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
I